Greetings, friends. You are on the Ruslan Belov channel. Today, we will discuss the situation in Ukraine as of March 7th, 2025. A massive number of events have taken place, so let's get started. Before we begin, I would sincerely like to ask you to subscribe to the channel. Your subscription helps support and grow the channel. Many thanks to everyone who has subscribed. On March 7th, the Russian side entered a new stage of assault operations in the Sumy direction. In general, according to many military experts, the situation in the Sudzha salient is approaching its logical conclusion. There is a very high probability that within a few weeks, the Ukrainian Armed Forces (UAF) group in Sudzha will either withdraw entirely from the Kursk region or be completely encircled. Now let's go step by step. We begin with the area along the border between Nikolaevo-Darino and Sverdlikovo, as well as the settlements of Zhuravka, Basovka, and Novenkoe. According to various neutral mapping services, over the past 24 hours, the Russian army has significantly expanded its zone of control. A strong foothold has already been established on the Ukrainian side of the border. The Russian side has taken control of a large number of forest plantations, possibly some UAF strongholds, and has generally come very close to the settlement of Basovka. It is possible that in the near future, Russian forces will begin storming Basovka from multiple directions, both from the northwest and the north-northeast. If the Ukrainian side loses control of Basovka, it will effectively cut off the H07 highway, which connects Sumy Oblast to the town of Sudzha. Although there is not yet a full physical crossing or control of the road, Russian forces have already established firm FPV drone dominance over this section of the front, and the UAF is suffering catastrophic losses. Today, the first reports have emerged indicating that some Ukrainian units have begun withdrawing from the Sudzha direction. The Ukrainian side is gradually beginning evacuation efforts, pulling out soldiers and entire units. Next, we move to the northern encirclement, towards Malaya Lochnia. This is where the most frontline adjustments are occurring. Let's compare the maps over time. Just yesterday, the map of the Malaya Lochnia agglomeration looked like this. There are several villages here: Staraya Sorochina, Nikolaevka, Viktorovka, and the town of Malaya Lochnia itself. By the evening of March 7th, reports indicate that all villages surrounding Malaya Lochnia have come under firm Russian control. In these footage, we can see Russian soldiers raising the flag in the northern part of Staraya Sorochina. Other footage shows a Russian soldier raising the flag in Nikolaevka. This confirms that Ukrainian forces have abandoned this bank of the Malaya Lochnia River, and are now attempting to regroup and establish defenses around the former women's colony. The key question is whether the UAF is preparing for a long-term defense or simply regrouping before withdrawing from this northern salient. Today, the official channel of the Northern Military Group confirmed that during combat operations, Russian forces secured and cleared Viktorovka and Nikolaevka. Based on all these reports, the maps have been updated accordingly. At present, Russian forces have effectively reached the Malaya Lochnia River, which divides this foothold into two parts. The next objective for the Russian army is to cross this river, after which battles for Malaya Lochnia itself will begin. It is expected that an attack on Malaya Lochnia will soon develop from the northern part, along the railway, as well as from the surrounding forests and fields. The main goal of these attacks is to minimize the distance to the enemy and effectively place Malaya Lochnia in a fire pocket, forcing Ukrainian units to retreat southward. During this retreat across open fields, it is highly likely that a significant portion of Ukrainian military equipment will be destroyed. The situation here is extremely critical, and it appears that it will be resolved very quickly, likely within a few days. Some of the most significant updates today are coming from the southern part of the Sudzha salient. Firstly, the road in this area is now entirely under the fire control of Russian forces. A series of videos and reports published today show the destruction of UAF equipment on one of the main supply routes between Sudzha and Sumy Oblast. Additionally, both neutral and pro-Ukrainian mapping services have significantly updated their maps to reflect Russian advances on this section of the front. This is what the map looked like as of March 6, 2025. By the evening of March 7th, we can see that the Russian army managed to break through the UAF defenses and reach the supply route leading from the town of Sudzha towards the settlement of Miropoli. This road has effectively been cut off and is now under complete Russian fire control. Ukrainian units can no longer use this route. The only remaining road is the H07, but we can see that Russian soldiers and the Russian army are gradually advancing towards it from Sverdlikovo and Nikolai-Vodarino. If we summarize and roughly measure the distance between the Russian army's forward positions in the southern and northwestern encirclements, it is now no more than 12 kilometers. This is an extremely short distance. Now we move on to the Kupiansk direction, where a significant amount of information has also emerged. Over the past few days, we have repeatedly focused on and discussed UAF attempts to counterattack between Dvorechnoye and the settlement of Zapadnoye. According to neutral and pro-Ukrainian cartographers, the Ukrainian side has indeed managed to regain control over certain sections of the front. However, today, the initiative is once again in Russia's hands, and various sources and footage confirm that the Russian side has launched a decisive offensive, significantly expanding its zone of control in the past 24 hours. Most of this expansion is happening near the border between Krasnaya and Pavaya Kamenka. This information has been published by various neutral, pro-Ukrainian, and of course, pro-Russian cartographers. A major offensive is underway, the front line is being leveled, and the Russian foothold on the Ukrainian side of the Oskol River is expanding. It appears that Russian forces are transitioning to a decisive assault stage here as well. Very interesting information is coming from the central Kupiansk direction. Yesterday, some pro-Russian sources reported that during assault operations, Russian army units managed to cross the Oskol River and establish a foothold in the settlement of Senkovo. Today, this information was partially confirmed by neutral cartographers, though without official frontline adjustments, as it is still unclear whether Russian troops have managed to secure their position on the Ukrainian side of the Oskol River. However, it is likely that they are currently attempting to expand this foothold and push Ukrainian forces out of the settlement. If Russian troops succeed in securing Senkovo, we can confidently say that the encirclement of Kupiansk from both the south and north will soon begin. It seems likely that Russia will attempt to implement this maneuver in the near future, attacking Kupiansk along the R79 highway from the south, while simultaneously advancing from the north. We expect a high-intensity battle in this area in the coming days. Next, we move to the Lyman and Seversk directions. Here, there has been a slight adjustment to the front line near Belogorovka. Footage from the 81st Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces has been published, showing FPV drone strikes on Russian assault units attempting to advance westward toward Grigorovka. Strikes were carried out along this road, leading to minor map updates. Neutral cartographers have also made small frontline adjustments, claiming that these forested areas are now under Russian control. Now we move to the town of Chasiv Yar, where some of the most intriguing footage and reports have emerged. Over the past 24 hours, the Russian army launched a decisive assault on the northwestern part of the settlement. Using a large amount of military equipment and personnel, Russian forces successfully crossed the railway and fully cleared the northwestern part of Chasiv Yar. There is even footage of this operation, published by the Ukrainian side. The footage shows a massive Russian military convoy moving at night, crossing the Seversky Donets-Donbass Canal. We can see that the Russian army, nearly without losses, crossed the railway in the northwestern part of Chasiv Yar. Ukrainian forces only began striking once Russian troops had already entered the territory under UAF control. It is possible that Ukrainian soldiers missed this movement due to the fact that the US has stopped sharing intelligence data with Ukraine. Once again, Russian columns were not targeted while moving through the northern quarters of Chasiv Yar or crossing the Seversky Donets-Donbass Canal. The strikes only began when they reached the railway. This is undoubtedly a major failure on the part of the UAF. As a result of this mistake, the central part of Chasiv Yar is now operationally encircled. Yes, the UAF may still have some limited evacuation and troop rotation options through the forested areas, but these movements are now happening at extremely short distances and under constant Russian fire control. Given the breakthrough in the northwestern and western parts of Chasiv Yar, there is a very high probability that within the next 24 hours, everything east and northeast of this red line will fall under firm Russian control. This would effectively mark the fall of Chasiv Yar and the beginning of battles for the Kostiantynivka agglomeration. It appears that the Ukrainian armed forces attempted to launch a counter-offensive from the north to slow down the advance of the Russian army. However, all equipment, warehouses, and temporary deployment points were promptly detected, suppressed, and destroyed. By the time the offensive began, the Ukrainian side likely lacked the necessary resources to carry out a coordinated and effective operation. Now we move towards the town of Toretsk, where ambiguous footage of objective control, published by the Ukrainian side, has emerged. It shows a series of FPV drone strikes. Notably, one of these drone strikes targeted a forest belt located north of the settlement of Shevchenkova. Ukrainian FPV operators struck this location, which suggests that a Russian army reconnaissance and sabotage group may have advanced as far north as possible along the Kryvyi Torets River, possibly to establish fire control over key roads leading into this part of the settlement. It is also possible that Russian army positions were detected and subsequently targeted. We can now see that the focus is gradually shifting northward. Despite initial failures and setbacks in Ukraine's counter-offensive in Toretsk, the situation is now stabilizing for the Russian army, and Russian forces are gradually pushing Ukrainian troops back northward toward Kostiantynivka. Next, we move to the Pokrovska direction, where fighting continues along the entire perimeter. Unlike other sections of the front, the situation here is not as favorable for the Russian Federation. The UAF is actively counter-attacking, and their counter-offensive efforts are beginning to yield results. Let's start with the settlement of Udakna. Today, primarily pro-Ukrainian and neutral cartographers report that the settlement has been completely cleared by Ukrainian forces and has fallen entirely under their control. Just yesterday, most cartographers still marked the southeastern part of the settlement as under Russian control. However, new reports suggest that the Russian army may have been forced to retreat. As a result, Russia's initial gains in the early days of the Pokrovsk offensive have now been almost entirely nullified. The UAF is gradually regaining control of Udakne. Fighting is also ongoing in the settlement of Pishane. Increasing amounts of objective control footage are emerging from this area. The battle is now centered around a mine, with confirmed footage showing the presence of Ukrainian soldiers at that location. Additionally, there were recent reports that Ukrainian forces had entered the southeastern part of Shevchenko. Today, even some pro-Russian cartographers acknowledge that the entire northeastern part of Shevchenko is under UAF control. As we previously discussed, if the situation does not change soon, there is a high probability that the entire northern pocket, everything north of this yellow line, could return under Ukrainian control. The Ukrainian side is doing everything possible to achieve this. It is worth noting that this area contains numerous mines that may have been promised or included in an agreement on rare earth resources between the United States and Ukraine. However, if we look slightly eastward, in the area of Suky Yar and Lysivka, new footage indicates that Russian forces have managed to slightly expand their zone of control. Intense fighting is taking place for Lysivka, and for now, this section of the front appears to be favoring the Russian side. Now we move towards the Bohatyr direction, where a significant amount of new information is emerging. Let's start with frontline adjustments. Yesterday, the map looked different. At that time, Russian forces had only secured Andriivka along its perimeter and were still far from the eastern part of Kostiantynivka. However, today, the map has changed significantly. The most noticeable change is the advancement of Russian units northwest of Andriivka, aiming to close this small pocket located between Zaporizhzhia and Andriivka. Further advancement of the Russian army is also noted from Ulakli towards Kostiantynivka, seemingly reaching the farthest street. Russian units have reportedly managed to secure control over this street, known as Solneknaya Street. On the other hand, reports indicate that the Ukrainian side has carried out a series of successful counterattacks, regaining control over the southwestern and southern parts of the settlement. These short-range maneuvers and engagements, despite the temporary success of the UAF in the southern and southwestern parts of Kostiantynivka, appear to have had a primary objective: to break through and create corridors for the withdrawal of Ukrainian units trapped in the northern and central areas of the settlement. Additionally, Russian units are advancing through the fields toward the settlement of Bohatyr. As recently as yesterday, much of this area was still considered contested territory. However, new information and objective control footage now confirm that Russian forces have established firm control over these forested strips and fields. The Ukrainian side has released footage of drone strikes targeting Russian positions. As for the southern Donetsk direction, there appears to be an ongoing regrouping of forces. Over the past 24 to 48 hours, no new reports have emerged from this sector. This suggests that preparations may be underway for a decisive push.